Welcome to Sustainable Supply Chains. Um, what we'll talk about is how the changing nature of supply chains and the increasing perception and societal move towards sustainability are intersecting and what we can learn from that. Sustainability in supply chain management. Let's begin with a few definitions. Supply chain management encompasses all activities associated with the flow and transformation. So it's a process story and it's a transformation story of goods from the raw material stage through the end user. Now, the end user could be a customer, a consumer, a third party provider, basically nothing but a client, as well as the associated information flows. So it's not only the flow of raw materials as it's moving from raw materials to finished goods to something that's a consumable. It's also the flow of information. Oftentimes, the information of the good flows both forwards, which is called down the supply chain, and also up the supply chain. For example, whether a retail store talks about customers demanding things or returning things or complaining about certain things or learning about certain things or liking a certain products can oftentimes be pushed back upstream. So this is upstream so that the value chain itself knows exactly what to do, how to create, and how to manage different sets. Sustainable supply chain management, on the other hand, requires that sustainability criteria be met. So you've created a criteria for sustainability be met while maintaining competitiveness through meeting customer needs. So you're trying to meet customer needs while maintaining competitiveness, but having some kind of a sustainability criteria. Now, at this point, it's important to understand that when we talk about sustainable supply chains or sustainability is not just an environmental problem, it's an environmental and social problem. So, once again, sustainability is a function of both the environment and of social aspects. Give you an example. If you can look at things like carbon emissions, air pollution, deforestation, water shortages as environmental problems. On the other hand, you've got child labour violations, worker health and safety issues, which are social problems. Now, people are becoming more and more interested in how companies are making money. It's no longer the old adage that the only reason a firm exists is to maximize shareholder wealth has to a certain degree changed a tiny bit of its course. It's still true that you are trying to maximize shareholder wealth, but shareholder wealth with some degree of transparency in your environmental and social moves. So, to a certain degree, supply chains are boundary spanning, which means that now you've got to, with they're expecting by 2025, 1.8 billion people are going to become a part of the global consumer class. And people are getting more and more cognizant about what's going on. People want more information. People just don't want to buy things from a company. They want more information from a company. They want to know how things were produced, why things were produced, where are they being sourced from, or what is going to be the impact on the environment. Are they going to have better water supply? Are they going to make sure that they're not killing off half the world's forests in order to get a particular set of things? So, as we do that, as we're moving towards rapid growth in the consumer class, the new consumer class is also becoming very sensitive to how and why they're consuming certain goods. For those of you who don't ever think of where the good comes from, in terms of It might be a cool looking piece of clothing or a cool looking piece of electronics, but you really don't know what exactly is going on in order for you to get that piece. You are, to a certain degree, relying on some level of opacity just to serve your own tastes. Now, at one point of time, you'll have to ask yourself what exactly is the price that you are willing to pay in terms of health hazards or social hazards and environmental hazards for which you're willing to consume more. So, as supply chains become boundary spanning, coordination across normal boundaries means that many aspects of sustainability might be affected. Here's an example. Suppose you say, I am going to buy certain things from Mexico, or I'm going to buy certain things from Guatemala. It also means that getting the thing from Guatemala might require a pliable road system because it's not easiest to always fly things out from everywhere in the world. But in order for you to make a pliable road system, you might need to cut down a bunch of rainforests. So subtly coordinating across normal boundaries that we once thought would be just basic stuff that business is conducted through is no longer the central piece of the cog. Instead, now you're trying to think of what are the things that might actually impact what I'm doing. So, from initial processing of raw materials to consumption by the final customer, you're trying to, and not only that, you're also trying to then look at the reverse supply chain, which is once you finish once you finish using the goods. For example, how many times do we throw things out? Why is this whole idea of recycling even existing in this world? That's mainly because we're talking about the reverse supply chain. Once we finish these things, so that you suddenly don't have a typical television set which has more than 6 to 7 carcinogenic products just thrown in a dumpster or in a dump yard on which houses are being built or a new development is being created, to suddenly have people having loads and loads of carcinogenic symptoms. And instead, you're saying, let's make sure that the reverse supply chain is put into place, which basically means how can we now safely reuse and dispose of things so that we can reuse certain parts, and the other parts, when we dispose of them, we dispose of them safely. You've seen that in batteries, you've seen that in tires and rubber products. The question is, why can't that happen everywhere else? So for supply chains to be sustainable, it has to be sustainable across multiple boundaries, given the fact that it is spanning across multiple boundaries, and it has to be a cradle to grave approach. You need to know that where it begins, that's the cradle to the grave approach. You've seen what has happened in China, where nowadays people are worried about even stepping outside because their air pollution is so dramatically overwhelming that people are simply afraid of their lives. But to what extent will prosperity matter if at the end of the day social, environmental and health issues come to fore and come to bear on you? It's also important, as we carry on with understanding why supply chains ought to be sustainable, there are many reasons. Firstly, we're outsourcing like crazy. When you're talking about outsourcing, we're giving it away to vendors, whether these vendors are in this country or in some other part of the world, where you have no control over what they're doing, how they're doing it, what they're killing, how they're killing things, and you are basically it's like a black box. But you don't want it to be a black box, you want more transparency. Your watchdog groups very much, what once upon a time used to be groups like Greenpeace. You've got different NGOs, including United Nations groups, that look over who's doing what. You've got things under World Trade Organization that also looks into all these different sets. You've got government requirements, and government requirements oftentimes could be things like EPA, could be something in terms of The ECU, which is the European Common Union, it could be a certain pact like NAFTA. These are all groups. Now, as we speak of it, there is a probability that the United States is pulling away from the Paris Agreement. Now, I don't know if you remember this, or know of this, but in 2017, uh, about 200 countries in the world, they attended this climate change summit in the United Nations, at the United Nations, and the whole idea was to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. Uh, because the idea is if the entire planet warms up by 2 degrees Celsius, mm, it'll automatically create loads and loads of issues such as flooding, waterways collapsing, sudden destruction of agriculture, and so on and so forth. But they came up to the Paris Agreement was to basically you would keep cutting emissions at the rate of 5.3% per year, and these consumer and product goods companies would slowly reduce their carbon intensity by more than 90% between by 2050. So this is what the United States we are trying to pull out of in the process. The question is to so what might be the costs that we might have to suffer? And to a certain degree, if you've heard that Elon Musk, the chairman and founder of Tesla, he just stepped away from the president's advisory group right after there's been a bit of a hint that the United States is no longer going to remain a signatory to the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, do understand, climate agreements are fantastic. So when I say it's brilliant, it's wonderful, but you also have to realize that when an economy is growing, there are people, there's sometimes economic growth can be slowed down by overarching government requirements and watchdog groups and similar setups. So you've got to create a nice balance between you want an economy to prosper, yet not at the cost of the environment, society, and health. What that balance is a $1 billion question, and we'll try to get to it in a tiny bit. So, why should supply chains try to be sustainable? Well, you're trying to do multiple different things. You're trying to first reduce costs and waste. One thing they realize is sustainability is not just going bonkers over the environment or turning everybody into a tree hugger, but the very fact that by reusing resources that we otherwise would have thrown away, we are in a disposable society. But if we were to recycle and reuse things properly, or if companies taught us or used our sense of sustainability, they would actually make greater profits on the same vein because they'd now be able to come up with mechanisms to recycle things and reuse things and therefore reduce costs and waste. Second thing is to manage the risks. Not only social risks and environmental risks and costs of being sued and or sued by some other company or some agency, but also the risks of sudden climatic shifts or supply chain failure or a huge issue such as tainted milk or adulterated food products or something that is that bears some kind of poison or toxins within themselves that you cannot simply consume them. There was a case possibly 10 years ago where Mattel realized that the cost of outsourcing things to a Chinese firm that was asked to create enamel paints for some of the toys. These enamel paints now had toxins in them that were actually making children sick. That became a huge cost to Mattel altogether, and they had to completely pull every single unit out of the shelves. So Third, you're creating distinguishing or sellable reputation, so you're adding to your competitive advantage by creating some kind of a differentiation. Your differentiation in this case is something that you stand for. It's something that you talk about. That's something that you can be proud of. Possibly 4 years ago, Apple went into something called completely re-envision supply chain and supply code of conduct, where they wanted suppliers to maintain all the environmental, social, and safety regulations and health regulations so that its products would be sourced with the best items and the best mm, issues of society and the environment and health in mind. For that, customers are willing to pay more or premium for Apple products. You see the same thing with organic. We are willing to pay a premium for organic products and services, goods and services. And finally, to reinforce shareholder value. So you're trying to reinforce shareholder value by saying that shareholder value is created but not at an expense of everything else. Let's work together where everybody gets to the entire ecosystem, which includes the environment, which includes the society, which includes health. So if you were to rethink, shareholder value is now driven by the environment, society, and health aspects. So they all together contribute towards shareholder value creation. Shareholder value is not just financial, but financial along with environment, along with social, along with health, because that creates a long-term value proposition. In the same vein, I'll I'll let you ponder about. I'll give you a bit of food for thought in the process. First, realize that most of us nowadays we love to wear things like leggings and faux leather because we think that it's things like faux leather. And you say faux leather, it's false leather, faux leather, and so faux leather is basically nothing but synthetic leather. And of course, you might think that you know what, we're not killing animals because of that, but do realize synthetic leather does not automatically happen. You actually have to create some chemical compounds. Now, faux leather also does not disappear into the environment, which basically means it is not biodegradable. So, faux leather is not biodegradable, which basically means you're trying to save animals, but you're doing it at the cost of the environment. Every time now you keep changing your leather, your faux leather jackets, or your pants that have so much elastomers in it, and elastomer makes it stretchy, which is very popular, very fashionable, but at the cost is that it comes with the fact that it'll never ever dissipate. It'll be an elastic, it is basically an elastomer that will remain in the environment. It's a synthetic that will remain in the environment forever. And as shelf lives of clothing get shorter and shorter, you end up buying more and more and more. And even though you think you're buying faux leather to save the animals, why do you keep eating beef? So ask yourself this question: where exactly is the leather going from the cows that of whose beef you've been eating in the first place? So if you can answer that to yourself, then you'll understand that to a certain degree, we first need to realize that faux leather has become a fantastic corporate piece of the puzzle because synthetic leather costs way less than real leather for companies to put into materials, yet they sell it to us as, well, you know, it's good for the environment, or it's good because we're not harming animals in the process. Yet beef production has been going up for ages. So now we are having synthetic stuff that is never going to be biodegradable. Where exactly do we understand when the line is drawn and when the lines are blurred? So areas for supply chain sustainability would be things like product design. So product design would be what goes into the design side of the puzzle, where we can talk about whether it's going to be sustainable or not. Just the way I was mentioning about real leather and faux leather, design has to bring into account all these things in terms of where is it going to go, the cradle to grave approach. Product returns, once a product is finished, all the computers we've used, all our laptops, every time we've thrown one away or we've thrown away one of the batteries, do we know where they're going? Possibly they're building another Kuwait or some the stupid island of Dubai out of it, where it's basically half radioactive now, if you were to ask me. The length of the product life cycle, the shorter the product life cycle, the quicker it's likely to be replaced. The quicker it's likely to be replaced basically means that the shelf life goes down, which means it's going to be disposed. What happens when it's disposed? Extension of the product life cycle. Can we build things that will extend for a longer time period? There again lies this interesting thing. Should you go for wood crates, for shipping crates, or should you use plastic crates? Plastic crates will extend product life cycle because plastic is not biodegradable, which basically means it's going to last forever and ever and ever, and it'll never dissipate into the environment. Wood, on the other hand, will dissipate into the environment. It's completely biodegradable, but it'll last for a shorter time, which also means that if wood disappears in the environment, you'll have to cut more trees to get more wood. So it's not an easy thing to figure out, but you have to understand things like these end of life disposal. Everything comes with a cost, as it comes with a benefit. Question is, what do you assign greater value towards and to what extent? And that's upon you. Packaging. Packaging is becoming more and more important because every company is trying to figure out packaging that's biodegradable. If you say if you say Starbucks nowadays, they'll talk about how their packages are all recycled material, which means they're expecting you to recycle your products, which are then going to be turned back into similar bags and recycled pieces that typically will carry the recycling marker of the cradle to grave. It basically looks like, let's see if I can even draw it properly. And then that goes into another arrow, and that goes into another arrow. But you'll oftentimes see that in a particularly better drawing, but basically it looks like a triangle with like 3 arrows pointing, which basically means it's a cradle to grave approach. Then comes the issue of source reduction. Can we reduce the number of things we pull out from source, which basically means if we can build more products with fewer materials, it's always good. Then of course is recycling, which is, can we take pieces of what we've used and what we use currently and make them last longer and use them more? Material substitution. Instead of using things that are a certain material, can we replace them with certain other types of material? For example, there's a big push towards creating carbon-based setup or using nano-based setups where the same material that otherwise would not degrade or would not dissipate in the environment can now be either broken up into smaller plastic pellets. For example, a plastic piece could be broken up into smaller plastic pellets, could be used to again put through a die and a roll to create a completely new product. Waste disposal. How are we disposing waste? And as you've heard of the very famous story of the Cuyahoga River catching fire, that was mainly because companies were dumping waste onto the river. And it was either some fireworks, I've forgotten exactly what happened, and the river caught fire. That was sometime in the mid to late 20th century. But waste disposal has become a huge issue. What happens to all these toxic chemical and slag that's created out of these factories? Where do you dispose of them? Refurbishing, which is can you just change your product? Can you make sure that if it's defective, you don't just throw the product away? but you can actually take the product, replace the parts that were defective, and put them back in the market. Repair. We live in a disposable world, and we need to realize if it is a time that we can bring back repairing. But frankly speaking, things are easier to mold and create as a single unit nowadays than it is to repair. So repair might have gone the way of the dodo, but what has happened is remanufacturing and refurbishing might be the new trends of the day, where you're remanufacturing it by taking away the defective bits, and again, so your refurbished product or a remanufactured product, where you, instead of throwing away, creating total one-to-one disposal, you're creating a one-to fraction disposal. You're only disposing of the defective piece and you're rebuilding the rest. In understanding sustainability in a supply chain management environment, a common thing that the company uses is something called the triple bottom line, or sometimes called 3BL. You could specify it as it's called 3BL. So it's a triple bottom line that has three different dimensions. The first one is something called social. The social dimension, also oftentimes referred to as a strategic dimension, main idea there is to manage risks to organizational reputation and create competitive advantage. Now, companies have gotten on this bandwagon very, very well because they realize that as quickly as they can communicate, or the quicker they can communicate their sustainability and environmental stewardship and health stewardship back to their customers, the better they are at being perceived as the sort of competitor of choice. So a company, given other products or given similar products, customers are more likely to choose a company with a higher environmental or sustainability reputation than the other one. So you've got companies such as PepsiCo, where they have their sustainability strategy and goals always pointed out during their annual shareholder meetings, and they talk about impact of PepsiCo in the world with climate change, with water scarcity and public health issues and so forth. So it becomes the PepsiCo uses that as a part of its annual financial filing. You see the same thing with Coca-Cola, where Coca-Cola has been talking about how it's been efficient in using water by less than, or reducing water usage by 20%, and uses these third parties to do its water evaluation and water audits. Companies like Ford have all these have created this supply chain of conduct and supplier code of conduct, where the first tier suppliers have to meet environmental and social expectations, and especially greenhouse gases. The idea is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reach energy efficiency targets. You find loads of these companies getting into more formal reporting and communicating of how good they are at supply chains. Now, do realize this is not just limited to product companies, but including service companies such as Bank of America, where this company talks about LEED certification, which is leadership in energy and environmental design buildings. I think by 2012 it had 15% of all its buildings LEED certified, and was planning to move it to nearly 50% by 2020 and further thereafter. So it really doesn't matter what kind of company you are. This idea of creating a competitive advantage and managing risks to organizational reputation is done by making sure that sustainability, the social part of sustainability is not only practiced but also strategically communicated across the entire ecosystem. The second bottom line of sustainability in supply chains is environmental sustainability. You have to deal with regulatory issues, which is you have to make sure that there are certain guidelines by the European Union, by certain Trans-Pacific Partnership setups, NAFTA, EPA, these things are all kept in check. And risks of harm from usage, disposal, packaging, and shipping. You have to ensure that you're taking care of all of these things. The third one, of course, is the key piece of the puzzle, which is nothing ever really makes sense if it's not feasible, at least financially feasible. So that's your economic bottom line, which is sustainability can be cost efficient, and that to a certain degree has become the big push towards things such as omni channels, where nowadays or for a while now, possibly for the past couple of years, stores are rethinking the way they ship and reship and receive materials. And omni-channel is basically nothing but is called omni-channel. Omni-channel. Basically, omni means every. So stores typically have an online footprint and an offline footprint. So somebody can purchase something at a store and then return it online. Somebody, on the other hand, can purchase something online and return it to a store. Someone can purchase one thing at one store and return it to another store. So stores want to make sure that they're trying to reduce not only their costs but also their carbon footprint, because every time you need to ship it back to the warehouse, the same product that's returned to a store, if you now have to ship it back to the warehouse for it to be sold again, it's a big cost for them. So instead what they do is they're now trying to use their each different store as not only as a retail store but also as a shipping center, where if you've received things and somebody's ordering, you don't need to ship it back to the warehouse, instead ship it directly from your store itself. So sustainability therefore should be able to enhance shareholder value. So sustainability again in supply chain management uses triple bottom line. The first one is social or strategic, environmental and economic. So if you also think of it, this is nothing but a Venn diagram. We're using the triple bottom line, and we're using environment performance, social performance, and economic performance, and treat them as Venn diagrams where this, and this. So this, assume this is A, that's B, that's C. So anything A intersection B is nothing but this section. B intersection C is, that is B intersection C. A intersection B is this section, and A intersection C is therefore this section. Now this piece of the puzzle out here is when you're being able to practice all of them together, which is A intersection B intersection C, and this is supposed to be the best. So you've reached sort of your zen of sustainability when you've been able to aggregate or integrate both environmental performance and social performance and economic performance at the same time. So triple bottom line supposing factors are three in general. The first one is transparency and risk management. You're trying to anticipate harm from activities. Now this could be things that you participated in or you've partaken in and haven't been sort of revealed or hasn't been reported upon, but you think that if you get to know that they might actually impact your sustainability and your company credibility, credentials, and therefore its economic set. To a certain degree, if you were to think of the Volkswagen scandal of tweaking around with its emission data, that's an example of transparency and risk management. Second is stakeholder engagement and supplier operations. So you're trying to understand what are the operations that you do, that you perform, that could aid transparency or sustainability of transparency in supply chain. How do you engage your stakeholders and how do you maintain your supplier operations? The next one is organization culture. You have to ensure that Sustainability is not just lip service, they also call it greenwashing. You don't want to greenwash anything, you want to make sure that it's a part of the general culture, so it has to be deeply ingrained. Organizational citizenship must be something very, very important, which is people must feel and must belong to the philosophy and purpose of sustainability and the practice of sustainability in supply chains. And lastly, the value and ethics, which is need to value the fact that at the end of the day, in order to increase shareholder value, you cannot degrade the environment, society, and health. And that ought to become a part of your general ethical philosophy rather than anything else. Thirdly, you've got strategy. And strategy, sustainability becomes a part of an integrated strategy, just like A intersection B intersection C. That's where the triple bottom line meets, and that's where your sustainability is achieved as an overall organization initiative. So, sustainability supply chains, Walmart is always a very interesting example. So, this retail giant is has been doubling its truck fleet efficiency in the United States right in through 2017. It's replacing two-thirds of its fleet with fuel efficient trucks, loads and loads of hybrid trucks being introduced into the Walmart fleet. It's also collaborating with truck and component manufacturers to build energy efficient prototype tractors. So Walmart is moving into a very different field. Not only that, if you have heard of the latest news, Walmart is also asking its employees to start delivering products on their way home for a certain premium, which basically means that it's trying to take on Amazon, but while reducing its carbon footprint, which basically means if the employee is automatically going home, perhaps couple more stops or three more stops might just add less than half a percentage to their carbon footprint. However, dedicating a certain truck, which is either LTL, which stands for less than truckload, or FTL, which is full truckload. If it's full truckload, then it's fine. Anything less than full is called less than truckload, and then it becomes a cost efficiency issue. So it's trying to sort of not only take on Amazon, but also take on Amazon by virtue of its own employees and asking them that would you be willing to take a premium to deliver packages. That way it makes it faster, which makes it very strategic, makes it adds to the employees' earnings, which makes it social, reduces environmental footprint, which takes care of the environmental piece, and thirdly, make sure that Walmart doesn't have to pay extra for truck fleets and delivery separately, because now you're not dedicating an entire truck that's going round and round several different routes, but instead you're using an employee which takes care of it. Economic, to a certain degree, it's a move towards a triple bottom line. So November 2006, Walmart first introduced the sustainability packaging scorecard. So November 2006, Walmart started something called the Sustainable Packaging Scorecard. The goal was to reduce packaging and supply chains by 5% by 2013. Now, packaging is always a big issue. Just think of it. If you can't fit things exactly properly, you're wasting a lot of time wasting a lot of space and efficiencies through empty space. What Japan had done a long time ago was it started looking at watermelons, and every time they wanted to ship watermelons, they realized that every watermelon shipment was basically a wastage of nearly 40% of the space, because watermelons are round and space between round items always is wasted space. So Japan started growing watermelons as square, watermelons or cube watermelons. So they started growing watermelons in cubed boxes so that they could now stack an entire truck, which basically means now you were able to get more than 30% in. So 60% previously was utilized space, now 60 to 100, you're basically adding another more than 50% to your efficiency in order to fill the set. So predicted results with Walmart was you'd reduce 667,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. You'd get 213,000 trucks off the road annually, and you'd save 66.7 million gallons of diesel. So the 7 R's of sustainable packaging was to remove things that are inefficient packaging, reduce packaging that is too much, waste of space, not taking care of all the available capacity, reuse the packaging so that you're not constantly adding to, firstly, buying more packaging, but also being able to refabricate it. Renew, make sure that you're using something that is a bit of a renewable, which is you can recycle it and reuse it again. Make sure that you can recycle your packaging. Make sure that your packaging costs are going lower, and finally you could readjust your packaging so that now even if something came in a package, you could repackage it to make sure that it fit properly. So when Walmart tells a supplier that it wants a change in packaging, that supplier will change all its packaging. So Walmart, and this is, if you remember your strategy from the 5 forces, this is bargaining power of suppliers or bargaining power of buyers in this case. So in this case, this is bargaining power of buyers is so high in Walmart that Walmart has the potential to have a tremendous impact on America's environmental footprint. So this is David Willett who mentioned that, who's the spokesperson for the Sierra Club. So in 2009, Walmart said it would develop a sustainability index. And the first step was understand its suppliers. Second was to understand the life cycle of each of its products. And the third one was to create a tool for its customers where they could, to a certain degree, understand exactly how transparent the supply chain was. So in 2010, Walmart announced plans to eliminate 20 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the global supply chain by the end of 2015. And the goal was to reduce energy use and cost for suppliers, Walmart and customers. So Walmart sells it as a win-win for not only itself, its customers, but also for its suppliers. Now comes reverse supply chains. So a big part of sustainable supply chains is understanding and using reverse supply chains to the best of your advantage. So reverse supply chain is a means of enhancing sustainability by retrieving products from customers. Anytime you see something that says that, or anytime you've gone for a tire change and the dealer has asked you, or the tire shop's asked you to pay $10 for a tire simply for disposal, it basically means they're trying to follow some code of conduct that's set up by EPA or somebody similar, which requires your end-of-life disposal to be done safely. The same thing you find with batteries, you find the same things with electronics, where now Best Buy will say, deposit your the electronics you'd rather throw away, just throw them here. Now that creates a very interesting problem though, because, well, a problem, but also it's a very interesting economic value added for Best Buy, because Best Buy will get all those electronics, ship it to a third party. The third party's job is going to be looking at the motherboard, looking at all the electronic components like resistors and transformers and step downs and transducers and capacitors, and which are diodes and so forth, and take them apart piece by piece, repackage them, and then sell them into the market. The problem with that approach is oftentimes these are unscrupulous third parties that will end up reselling something that's defective or something rather than dispose of it properly or use it properly. So, this reverse supply chain is when, at the end of life, a product is returned back into raw materials and then it goes back into the original supply chain setup. The second one is so safe end of life disposal, refurbishing. Something goes wrong, you don't throw away the whole television, instead, you take care of one component and you put the television back in the market. Reuse for spare parts, just the way we mentioned, and then value in recycling. Create a philosophy of when something isn't working, not every part of it isn't working. Instead, you make sure that you take the right parts on and off and create a new product in the process, or or put it back in the market in the process. To a certain degree, it's been ages that junkyards have been doing that, where they realize a person whose car isn't working might simply be more than happy to have somebody tow it away. But that car might not be working because of an engine malfunction or because of a gasket or something similar. But it doesn't automatically mean that every part of that car is problematic. Therefore, junkyards realize that they can strip a car into multiple parts and sell each part separately enough that sometimes selling each part is going to make them much more money than selling the entire car, even in a working condition. So you're valuing and recycling, you're reusing for spare parts, you're refurbishing, and you're safely ending or disposing goods at their end of life. So what's different about a reverse supply chain? If you look at a forward supply chain, which is typically the supply chain that we've been using since just about time immemorial, the forward supply chain begins with planning. It starts with planning, which basically builds on forecasts. Forecasts, nothing but you try to estimate demand. Now, if your forecast is wrong, it starts spreading itself further and further and larger up the supply chain, and that creates something called a bullwhip effect. So it goes like that, which basically means that if your forecasting is problematic by this much here, early on, the forecasting, the amount of materials you'll end up procuring for production is going to be way larger. So a single error magnifies itself as you move upstream. So an error propagates or magnifies itself as you're moving upstream. The same error here becomes a larger error there. So this forecasting is basically to a certain degree the handmaiden of most supply chain systems that we know of and we typically have seen. Location has always been one to many. One warehouse, many different areas you're covering, right? That's the typical setup. One to many, one warehouse, many retail. Costs are very well defined, which basically means you know exactly what you want to produce. You produce in bulk. You try to minimize ordering costs and holding costs by simply knowing exactly when you need things, but you always get things in bulk. But sometimes if they don't sell, instead of lowering your ordering and holding costs, it increases your ordering and holding costs. You focus on product ordering costs. Mainly you're focusing on product ordering cost rather than what happens to the product once it's past its life cycle. You typically assume that it's a loss in the inventory, if it's a return and it's no longer in style, no longer in preference, then it's all gone. Visibility is very high priority. You want to make sure that the entire supply chain is visible. Reverse supply chain, on the other hand, your planning is much more reactive. So, what you're doing is you're trying to look at what exactly went on in the market, why things didn't sell, what things are being returned, what how things are being disposed, and you're bringing everything back. So you're reacting to changes in people's preferences. Location, many to one. You're gathering things from many different places. So there are many different places where you're dumping your batteries, your tires, your electronics, and they're being all shipped back to one location where it's now being stripped and then pieces taken out and then refurbished or recirculated and recycled through the whole system. Costs not easily defined because you really don't know what went wrong or why was it returned, what you'd be able to uh, recover and what you'd have to throw away. Additional costs are not easily justified. So if there are issues in terms of you spend a lot of money getting something back only to realize that none of it is usable, then it suddenly is a sunk cost. And as you all know, a sunk cost is something that you simply cannot recover. Um, Finally, visibility is low priority because you really don't know where people are going to recycle and how they're going to recycle, at what pattern they're going to recycle, because you really can't assume people's preferences. But once you start getting the whole idea through, you'll start, if we get a proper culture of recycling and recovering and reuse and reverse supply chain, then to a certain degree planning can become much more proactive than reactive. Benefits of reverse supply chains are as follows. Firstly, you have an economic benefit, which is you're trying to maintain product value and increase its reuse. You're trying to create continuous improvement. So by reuse, you're trying to maintain product value. So you're saying that the value of a product doesn't automatically finish the minute somebody disposes of it. Instead, there's still some value within the product. If we can get it back, we can take some of the material and reuse it. Very much like whether you're talking about clothing or fashion or electronics or cardboard boxes or paper. You can do the same out there. You can use material, you can use components, you can use um, corrugation sheets and everything. Um, Continuous improvement is you're always trying to figure out what would be the best combination and recombination that you can do in order to solve a particular problem. Ethical pieces of the puzzle. Firstly, there's customer safety. So you know that if you have a reverse supply chain and process, if something were to go wrong, you can easily correct it because you know the reverse supply chain is running well and good. Customer satisfaction, mainly because you now know that you can offer customers, if you're being able to reuse. So reuse automatically has a high correlation, has a positive correlation with cost control. If you can do better cost control, what you can therefore do, you can pass the savings back to the customer. Environmental, of course, you've got the ability to protect and safeguard sustainability, and this is again not only environmental sustainability but also health sustainability, which ties into environmental sustainability, and social sustainability that ties into environmental sustainability. Then legal, you've got global rules and regulations such as the WEE Act. So the WEE Act stands for Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Act, and you'll find that European Commission like 2 months ago embodied that as it's basically a common method for calculating the weight of electrical and electronic components that are placed in the national market, and you want to make sure that you want to reduce any kind of waste from each of these products. So whether it's computers, televisions, fridges, cell phones, they realized that nearly 9 million tons of waste was generated in like 2005, and about 12 million tons to be generated by 2020. And because electronics uses a complex set of not only electronics but also clothing, we're talking about for fur and for leather and things like plastic containers versus wooden crates. So you've got, they're all using very complex compounds and materials, and if they're not properly managed, they can cause seriously environmental health concerns. For example, a single television set contains at least three elements that oftentimes can react, including mercury in the previous CRTs, that can lead to carcinogenic behavior. So you're trying to make sure that you're reducing the footprint of your operations and your supply chains. If you're looking at challenges in the reverse supply chain, there are as follows. First, you've got operational challenges, and the operational challenges include information and process flow. You need to make sure that the information flows right on time and the process flows seamlessly. You need to make sure that roles are assigned in terms of where do we understand what material we're putting in, what supplier vendor are we using to get your stuff in, how do you make sure that when things are returned, how you manage those things, what goes to whom, then product, what exactly can you strip from a product, whether it's a piece of clothing material, if you can reuse the clothing material into something else, where should you put it, how should you channel it, when should you inventory it, and so forth. Then you've got financial costs, which basically include what is the cost of getting something, and is the cost of a reverse supply chain going to be less than or equal to, so a reverse supply chain costs ought to be less than the cost of reuse. Otherwise, this is basically a lost venture. Finally, you need technological system where you need loads and loads of IT systems to know exactly what you're getting from where, so you can then run thorough analytics on these things to get a better gauge when to acquire, where to acquire all your reuse and recycled materials from. So this is the new economy. The the old setup typically used to be raw materials and natural resources. This is a push system, mainly a push system. Then you produce, then you consume, and then you waste, and then you dispose. You'll find that in a circular economy, what's happening is everything becomes both a push and a pull system. A pull system is when a system is demand driven, and a push system, so push is when it's supply driven. So we decide what we want to make, we'll make it, we'll see what sells. That's a push system. A pull system is demand driven, which basically means we want to know what to make based on what we think the market actually wants. And we will try and keep our fingers close to the pulse of the customer and know what they want and prepare things for them. So whether you're talking about things like build to replenish, which is only when one thing is sold do you make the next order, or build to order, when people order things and you build it from scratch, just the way nowadays you see most car companies have moved into design your own car and customize your own car and so forth. Now this becomes the hallmark for a circular economy, where you're making, consuming, and then enriching, you're pushing it back into the system, whether it's a biological system, you're trying to follow an ecosystem. And then the manufacturing and industrial symbiosis with technical materials you're making, using, and returning it. So you're trying to constantly combine both pieces of the puzzle together. So you're getting energy from renewable resources, the REs, reduce, reuse, remanufacture and refurbish, recycle, reassembly and reimagine. So you're constantly trying to think of what could we use the product for, even though the product has ended its general life cycle. Sustainability standards are as follows. So you've got multiple different standards. So let's look at materials. Here are some of the material standards. These standards called Design for Environment or DFAs, renewable materials, recycled content. You need to do life cycle analysis, which is what time and when and how do you pace a product so that, and the timing of a product release, so that when it ends its life cycle it can be pushed back into the system. Extended product responsibility, waste management and water management. Then you've got energy and atmosphere. You've got energy policy, which basically is building energy policy, embodied energy, GHG, which is greenhouse gases emissions. Human and ecosystem health, you have risk and environmental management systems policies, including something called ISO 14001. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. It's a Swiss agency that looks at certification standards for production and supply chains. Effects of product process, maintenance, chemicals, reduction, elimination of toxic chemicals. Social responsibility, you've got labor and human rights, employee health and safety, social responsibility and reporting, and then supply chain management. Now, talking about impact through materials, there are many different. If you can manage your materials well, you can really start rethinking. So it's the story of a sustainable supply chain starts with your choice of materials. Design, packaging are fantastic, but your materials are things that will actually can be returned and can be reused. So you need to focus on dematerialization. So you're no longer saying that that itself is just going to be a waste, that clothing piece is going to be a waste. Now, if you can recreate it, it adds more value, both in terms of sustainability as it does in terms of operational efficiency and cost management. It's more durable, increased recycled content, cleaner materials, lower processing energy, so materials that require less work and less processing energy in order to either convert them or to mold them or to stretch them or to build on them or to fabricate them or to put them through a lathe and so forth. High recyclable content, you know that you can modularly break it down into pieces that can therefore create a better mechanism to get things back together and reuse things when you need to. Supply partnerships do aid in new material discovery. That's the time when companies start working very closely with suppliers, because suppliers oftentimes will say that, by the way, if you were to use this particular material instead of this material, then you'll suddenly realize that there's a higher probability that you'll be able to reuse this thing over time, and you must keep costs in mind. So, example of sustainability best practices, bringing all of those things together. From design and re-engineering, you're using design for environment. Product and business development, you're looking at green chemistry, life cycle analysis, clean technologies, then material inputs, resource management, sustainable purchasing, renewable resources, and fair trade. And you'll see fair trade on chocolates, which basically talks about, well, we're also doing something socially, which is when we're acquiring possibly cocoa from someplace in Colombia or Bolivia, we're also making sure that the farmers who are actually taking care of this cocoa are also getting paid properly. So part of either the profit or whatever goes back into the whole system. Then manufacturing, we're looking at resource conservation and efficiency, sustainable manufacturing, waste minimization, environmental management system, employee health and safety, pollution prevention, GHG emissions, emission mitigation and adaptation, and environmental impact reduction. Then comes distribution and logistics as we are moving down the value chain. Sustainable transportation and sustainable packaging are, so you want to create multimodal setups. Nowadays, the idea is, you build locally sell globally. Then comes use. You use sustainability standards and certification, you education and training. If people don't know what to recycle, how to recycle, the philosophy of it, if you haven't educated your customers, your clients, your end users, your consumers, then it becomes to a certain degree a moot point trying to get ideas like sustainability through. Product, return, reuse, remanufacture, end of life, you create disposal mechanisms, recovery, and reverse logistics, and the whole thing flows back into these areas. So, when you're talking about value creation, so you're trying to understand the business value drivers of sustainable supply chains. So you're trying to manage risks, creating efficiencies, developing sustainable products, creating a culture of sustainability and responsible sustainability, improving brand image, and differentiating, and also you're disrupting and you're adding an edge over the competition. The value creation drivers are it allows you to generate better pricing power because now if you can build things, you can firstly talk about how you're different, and for being different you can always charge a premium, just like most companies that can charge a premium too. Establish cost savings because now you're being able to recycle and reuse material, you're reducing the cost of purchasing new materials constantly, increasing market share and entering new markets. Especially, think of it as the European Common Union or the European Common Market creates more and more regulations about what goes into things. It's sometimes helpful to know that, all right, if we were to play it this way, then it's easier to enter that particular market. Sustainability challenges and approaches, environmental management systems. So you need to understand and have these environmental management systems, which basically are nothing but knowing what goes into where and how you can recover them, how you can reuse them, the costs of each material, what suppliers you can get them from, design for environment, DFA, life cycle analysis, employee and customer health and safety, asset productivity, training and education, and innovation and creativity. Revenue and margin growth. In this case, you're trying to avoid higher costs, increase productivity, better the quality of the product, increase material reuse, and minimize waste. With profits, you're accruing your savings mainly because you're going to realize them even more later. Because now, if you can recycle and reuse and recover and reimagine, you're suddenly creating lower need for materials in the next run or for the next run, which means your savings are getting accrued. Reduced liabilities and risks, improved safety, and reinvestments of savings. Finally, the total business value is in sustainability reporting, improved decision making, better risk management, enhanced brand reputation, customer loyalty, and recognition of sustainability as a core phenomena. Here's a very basic example of how you do a life cycle analysis. It's called an LCA. Very, very brief. It depends on product to product and what you're trying to understand. So, what you do is you create basically, it's nothing but a matrix. The first one, the columns are all the environmental, they're called stresses, which are things that stress the environment. And then out here, you've got the life cycle stages. So your life cycle stages are as follows. You've got your pre-manufacture or sourcing. you've got your production, you've got your outbound logistics, you've got your product use, and then you've got your reverse logistics. Now what you do out here is you look at material choice, energy use, solid residue, liquid residues, GHG, and then you do a total. So all you do is for each single material, you'll see that max might be, so maximum is 5. So you might say that, all right, your material choice for pre-manufacture was possibly 3 out of 5. This was 3 out of 5. This was 2 out of 5. This was 4 out of 5, and this was 3 out of 5. And similarly, you can say that, all right, at the production level, your material choice was possibly 2 out of 5, and then product delivery was 3 out of 5, product use was 4 out of 5, and this was reverse logistics was 3 out of 5. And all you do in this case is you start calculating, and you say 3 and 3, 6, 8, 12, 15. So you've got 5. So basically it's nothing but 15 out of 25. So got 15 out of 25, which is, therefore you're saying that this is about 60%. And this one is 3 and 2, 5, 5 and 3, 8, 8 and 4, 12. And it's just about, it follows the same bit. For some reason I just put in very similar numbers. So this is 15 out of 25, but what it tells you is important. So this is the way to set it up. The rows, you'll have the life cycle stages: pre-manufacture, production, output logistics, product use, reverse logistics. And then the columns, you'll have your environmental stresses, the material choices, energy use, solid residue, liquid residues, greenhouse gases or gaseous residues, and then total. So all it says out here is, at the pre-manufacture level, you're performing in terms of, so if you were to have a higher number, it would basically mean you're being able to use it to the best, right? So greenhouse gas emissions, higher number basically means it's very good. You're managing your greenhouse gases very well. Or it could be the opposite way. You could play it either way. So in this case, you'd say you're achieving 60% efficiency. On the other hand, across the entire life cycle, your material choices are only 60% efficient. Similarly, you can say this is 1 out of 5, this is 3 out of 5, this is 5 out of 5, this is 4 out of 5, so that's 3 and 4, 5, 5 and 3, 8, 8 and 5, 13 and 4, 17, so 17 out of 25. In this case, if you were to just create that and say that's 5 out of 5, that's 3 out of 5, that's 4 out of 5, say 4 and 5, so 5, 10, 14, 17, 21 out of 25. So you can understand the performance of your output logistics in terms of the environment stresses coming from your product use. On the other hand, out here it'll tell you across your life cycle how good is your energy is. So that's your typical mechanism to craft a life cycle analysis table. Thank you very much, guys, and the next lesson will follow shortly.